Diana, it is so good to meet you. Thank you so much for being with us today. And I have to confess, I'm really looking forward to this discussion about green leases.
Hi, Steve. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to talk about the Green Lease Leaders Program and the benefits of green leasing.
And I hope we'll talk a little bit about IMT.
Yes, of course.
Yes, yes, people need to know about your organization. So let's begin by please introduce yourself and your organization. And if you would, share a little bit about why you care about sustainability.
Yeah, of course. So my name's Diana Lee. I am the Associate Director of Business Engagement for IMT, or Institute for Market Transformation. We are a national nonprofit based in Washington, D.C., and our focus is creating high performance buildings that are efficient, resilient, healthy, and equitable, really to create better buildings for better lives for people working, playing, living within these spaces, and to improve the communities in which these buildings are located. So we do this through three avenues: partnering with the government, working with community-based organizations, and also connecting with businesses. So in my role, I fall under this third prong. I'm part of the business engagement team and I lead our green leasing work. And green leasing is one of the key levers to help the real estate industry take action on sustainability goals because these leases can cut energy, water waste, and also make these bills more affordable for everybody and enable the property to take action to decarbonize and really improve sustainability at the building level.
Thank you. And for those listening in, IMT is an organization that I highly want to encourage everyone to check into. So, following up on your introduction, thank you. Would you get into a little bit more details about what a green lease is, how it's different from a traditional lease, and how it impacts sustainability and sustainability reporting?
Yeah, so to understand a green lease, we have to take kind of one step back to understand the impact of buildings. So buildings contribute to about a third of US carbon emissions, and for cities, that percentage is a lot higher. Often about 60 to 80% of emissions is from energy used in buildings. And the lease is the one document that governs what happens or doesn't happen throughout the life cycle of a tenanted building. So if you want to ensure that sustainability and building performance is a focus, it needs to be covered in the lease. So that's where the green lease comes in. With a green lease, it recognizes that landlords and tenants need to come together to create win-win outcomes at the building level. And it does this by incorporating clauses about data sharing, collaboration, shared building energy use targets, and more. And this is really important because traditional leases often have baked in hurdles for achieving sustainability goals. So, in particular, I'm talking about the split incentive. So, with traditional leases, with that split incentive, one party is generally responsible for investing in upfront costs. So, typically the landlord, and then the other party, typically the tenant, reaps savings from that project. So, as an example, if I'm a landlord and I decide to replace all of the equipment in the building to higher efficiency models, then the tenant tends to be the one who sees the savings in the form of reduced energy bills. But if I'm a tenant, it also doesn't make sense for me to invest in my space because I don't own it and I might only be there for a couple of years. So ultimately, with the split incentive, it's really, really difficult to justify projects economically and results in a stalemate. There's not a motivation to invest in efficiency capital projects, which are often the ones with the greatest potential energy and water savings at the building. And then another issue is that traditional leases can often restrict who has control or visibility over utility data. So if I'm a tenant, maybe I pay the landlord for my estimated utility costs each month, but I don't get to see the numbers or the actual consumption numbers for my consumption. So if I make changes to my space and try to increase efficiency, I don't actually have data to understand if my changes have meaningful results and I'm not saving money as a result of my actions. Or if I do pay my own utility bills, I might not have access to the whole building's energy or water data, so I don't understand how my space is performing in the context of the building. If I lease 20% of a building, say it's an office, but my space consumes 80% of the energy for the whole building, then something is off. And I need to know that information so that I can identify ways to improve efficiency and see if there might be an issue with my space. So ultimately, this knowledge and this data sharing is power. And then in regards to sustainability reporting, we're seeing more sustainability reporting requirements overall. The market is shifting towards more regulatory requirements. And this is because in many urban areas, there's really no way to reach climate action goals without lowering energy use in buildings. So we're seeing increased building performance standards in particular, which are regulations that have specific energy consumption or carbon emissions targets for buildings. There are also non-regulatory shifts at play, so investors demanding more sustainability performance and sustainability data. Also, companies setting really aggressive decarbonization goals like net zero. And then tenants also want more efficient buildings. So last year, JLL published an article demonstrating that the demand for low carbon workspaces is set to outstrip supply of these spaces by 75% across major US markets by 2030. So that's only 5 years away from now. So all that's to say, green leases are a really valuable risk mitigation tool. They support compliance with new policies, which thereby reduces the risk to your company or the potential cost of non-compliance fees. And with a green lease, landlord and tenant are working together towards common goals and agreeing to share data with each other so that both parties can take meaningful action to lower the energy needs at the building, reducing carbon emissions and saving money. And having that green lease means that you're facilitating this conversation up front. So the expectations for landlords and tenants are clear from day one, and that both parties are committed to creating these win-win outcomes with each other.
Awesome. I get it. It's important. The data is incredibly important, especially if they want to be accurate in their own reporting. So totally get it. So now here's my question to you. Can a small company that is just leasing a space in a large building use a green lease? And if so, how do you recommend that they go about bringing it to their landlord?
Yeah. So any company can use a green lease, whether you're a tenant or landlord, large or small company. And the steps to green leasing are still pretty similar, despite landlord tenant or whether you have a big or small company. So the first question is really to understand if you already have green leases in place or have signed green leases. And you might be surprised because many of these leases, especially if you look at the green lease leaders, have leases with sustainability related clauses in it. So if you understand what your current status is, then it makes it easier to implement if there's already a precedent for a green lease clause. And once you have the lay of the land, engagement is very, very important. Who's involved at the transaction table for your company? It's always optimal for leasing reps or brokers to be knowledgeable about green leases so that they can help make sure that the lease reduces these sustainability related risks for your company. And when feasible, we also recommend bringing a sustainability contact to the lease negotiation table to make sure that these key green lease clauses aren't just eliminated for no reason because people don't understand the value of the green lease clause. And this engagement, particularly with the leasing reps, the brokers, anyone who's at the transaction table, it's really meant to show that green lease clauses aren't an extra, but they can be very beneficial and important for your company's goals. And if the word green doesn't resonate for you, you can call it performance-based or energy efficient leasing, but the strategy is still the same. And then working together with these stakeholders, determine what's the most important for your organization. Is it your organization has ESG goals? Are you trying to meet local regulations or is it something else? And then after you come to that consensus, you can talk about what the most relevant green lease clauses are for your company and incorporate that into your standard lease requirements or create a standard leasing memo to include those clauses in your future lease. And it's important to keep in mind that this process, you're not trying to create more work. Rather, that you're putting in the work now to set up green leasing for success and to reduce risk to your organization. And you don't need to incorporate like 10 clauses all at once. The goal is to start somewhere. So maybe you identify one or two clauses and you go from there. And then even before you get to the leasing stage, you can engage with the landlord about sustainability. That lease negotiation table shouldn't be the first time the landlord sees that you're interested in sustainability. So in your RFI, you can ask them questions like, what's the space's Energy Star score? Are there any energy tracking capabilities? Does the landlord have ESG goals? Does the space have any regulations? Is the landlord a green lease leader? And asking these questions in advance isn't going to stop you from leasing a space or slow down a deal. It's really about gathering information so that you can make an informed decision and so that you can adjust expectations. So, for example, if I asked all these questions and the landlord says no, or they don't have any of these things, then you'll understand it might be more important to get, or it might be more difficult rather, to get data from the landlord, and it might be more difficult to incorporate green lease clauses. But then if the landlord has some or all of these things, you might have more negotiating opportunity. And then likewise, if you're deciding between two spaces, let's say one space has a high energy star score, which means the space is very energy efficient, and the other space has a low score. With everything else being equal, you might decide that the more efficient building is a better space for your needs. And then once you're actually at the lease negotiation table, talk about the value of these green lease clauses for the landlord. After all, it's about win-win outcomes. So demonstrate to the landlord how it's also beneficial for them.
Great information. Thank you. I'm going to assume that most of the people listening to this discussion probably would be clueless on what they really want to go to talk to their landlord about. And where I'm going with this comment is, does IMT provide information? Um, can you share a little bit about your green lease program?
Yes, of course. So we do have a lot of publicly available information from our Green Lease Leaders program. And the Green Lease Leaders program really came about because one of the biggest challenges to green leasing is education. People need to know about this tool. People need to know about the different clauses. So in order to tackle this need for education, we started the Green Lease Leaders program back in 2014 as a partnership between Institute for Market Transformation and the Department of Energy's Better Buildings Alliance. And the idea was to both scale the use of green leases to overcome that split incentive I mentioned earlier, and then also establish a best practice, establish standards for what constitutes a green lease. So our program has grown exponentially since inception in 2014. Originally, we started off with office buildings based in the US, but since 2014, we've grown to include retail, industrial, multifamily, healthcare, more, and also companies outside the US. So we have green lease leaders from the UK, Mexico, Australia, and and more. So that's, we've made a lot of progress in terms of the education and companies implementing green leases, but there's still a lot more work to be done. So, as part of Green Lease Leaders, we also have a lot of publicly available materials for folks to use. So, if you're just starting out in your green leasing journey and learning about it, we have lots of webinars, example green lease clauses, case studies, and more available on our website. And companies that use green leases, and especially as you're on that green leasing journey, if you use green leases, you should apply for Green Lease Leaders recognition. Even if a company doesn't think of themselves as a leader, you might meet the requirements of the program. And having that recognition demonstrates to the real estate industry that more companies are utilizing green leasing, that you're meeting industry best practices for green leasing, and that you're willing to be a partner for meaningful sustainability action at the property. So applications for the 2025 Green Lease Leaders recognition cycle open in just a couple of weeks on February 3rd. So for more information about the recognition program and also to see our resources, our website is greenleaseleaders.com.
Thank you very much. And just a couple of things to those listening in. One, IMT offers those green lease clauses or high performing building clauses or whatever we want to call it that works for you and the landlord. So IMT offers those clauses. And number two, I want to encourage everyone to bring this up to the people who are doing the leasing if you're not doing it. So to have the people in your company at least begin the discussion because that shows the marketplace that this is important. So with that, let me really thank you, Diana, for your time. It's been extraordinarily helpful, and you are greatly appreciated.
Thank you so much, Steve. We appreciate you.